First of all, welcome and good evening, everyone. My name is Wei-Tai Kwok, and I am on the Policy Action Leadership Team for the Climate Reality Bay Area chapter. And I want to give an extra warm welcome to everyone who's a first-time attendee of this meeting, and also a warm welcome to anybody who's not from the Bay Area, whether you're from Southern California or elsewhere in the country. Welcome. Thank you for joining our chapter meeting. For those of you who don't know, this is the Climate Reality Project is the nonprofit founded by former Vice President Al Gore. And we are one of 100 chapters around the country doing local action to try to move the needle to reduce greenhouse gases in effect and raise our voices as climate activists. It's interesting that as COP27 is happening in Egypt on the other side of the world, it's ever more important for us to be back here doing what we can do on the local level. And so I'm really excited that tonight's theme will be inviting three experts to discuss what climate activists like ourselves should be doing, can be doing to influence policies where we can in our own communities. But first, let me do a land acknowledgement. And myself, I'm coming to you from the city of Lafayette in Northern California, the Bay Area. It is a land inhabited by the Bay Miwok tribe. And this week I read with great interest that over in Sacramento, there was news that a new statue of a Miwok leader is being erected there, one of William Franklin. And that is a 7-foot statue that's going to be put in Sacramento in the place of the missionary Junipero Serra. And so I think that's really quite historic. And I felt just when I heard that he was a Miwok leader, William Franklin, I said, sort of resonate with me being here in Lafayette. So I want to, we had our elections in November, right? This past week, and we have excitement at the national level again, but we are also going to have elections for our own chapter here in the beginning of the new year. And so I wanted to announce that our chapter is always looking for new leaders to help us in various roles. And I'm not going to tell you all the roles now. I'm going to come back to you at the end of the session today, but I'll just put it out there and let you know that we are having elections soon, and I'm here to recruit you. So, all right, with that, let me turn it over to my fine colleague, Matt Bogoshian, who is going to introduce our panelists today and moderate our fun evening. Matt?
Great, Wei-Tai. Thank you, and good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Bogoshian. In my day job, I'm the former senior policy counsel at the US EPA in Washington during the Obama administration. After that, though, more importantly, in 2018, I was trained in Los Angeles as a climate reality project leader and came back here to join the Bay Area chapter. Then, working with other volunteers to make a difference through local policy action. Our chapter has had numerous events and trainings helping volunteers petition local governing bodies to adopt more aggressive GHG reducing policies. Our volunteers are in counties across the Bay Area and are often called policy action squads. And, they find leadership opportunities for people that have no organizing experience at all, but find some personal agency in combating the climate crisis by bringing these kinds of policy action petitions to local governing bodies. So this is an effort, this convening tonight is an effort to continue kind of empowering our volunteers with better tools and tactics for that purpose. So we're going to hear from some experts, people with experience working within local governing bodies to get their take on how our volunteers can most effectively get these stronger local policies adopted. Our three panelists are Stephen Falk, Deborah Fudge, and Timothy Rood. And I'm going to introduce Steve first. He's going to give us his 4 or 5 minute take on the topic. And then I'll introduce Deb to get her 4 to 5 minute take on the topic. And then I'll introduce Tim to hear from him on the topic. And then after that, we'll have a discussion in the time remaining. So want to have your voice add to the discussion. Just put your questions in there and chat. Wei-Tai and I will try to monitor the chat as best we can and curate the discussion as we go through the evening. So Without further ado, let me introduce Steve Falk. Steve's a longtime city manager, the city of Lafayette. He's had stints as interim city manager in the cities of Richmond and Oakland, and is a lecturer in public policy at the University of California, Berkeley. So, Steve, welcome.
Good to be here with you all this evening, and I honor the work that you do. There is literally no more important work than that work that you all are engaged in. So I am a lecturer at UC Berkeley, and I'm teaching a class this semester on city management. And when this topic was presented, namely this specific question about how do you get something on the agenda, on the public policy agenda of the governing board, well, I thought, I've got a couple slides that I use in my class that might be useful. So let me show you 3 slides. I don't think I'll go over my 5-minute allotment here, but this. I'm going to share my screen. When you see that photo, I think the natural impulse of most people is to go and pick up that cup and put it into the can, right? What most people would do. And that leads us to what is known as the garbage can model of public administration. And this is actually a thing. This is a theory that people talk about in the textbooks. And what it says is that just like your impulse is to go deal with the cup that has spilled out of the garbage can and put it in, public organizations tend to do the same thing. They tend to focus on whatever's coming out of the top of the garbage can and not necessarily what is inside. Decisions are therefore often random and unsystematic. It just happens to be that cup that's outside the garbage can. And the most visible or risible problems often get the attention, but not necessarily the most important ones, which is to say that much of the public policy making in our public organizations is either organized anarchy or unorganized anarchy. I'm not sure what that would be. So here's an example. You might see a headline in the newspaper that says, Florida man allegedly threatened family with Coldplay lyrics, ends the standoff after the SWAT team promises him some pizza. And that is the headline of the local newspaper because it's a fantastic thing that happened and everybody's interested in that. That's the thing that came out of the garbage can. But if you look inside the garbage can, and you ask people, what are the most important issues before your community? What they will tell you, and by the way, this chart that is on top of my garbage can here is a recent poll of the people of California. The bigger the word, the more important the issue. Climate change and homelessness are the most important issues, and immigration. But sometimes you wouldn't know that given the discussion that's going on, because we're more focused on the sensational event of the day, and particularly if it involves Coldplay lyrics. So this leads to my last slide. So this is a very typical outline of how policy is made in local government. And it happens in 5 steps, and these 5 steps are sequential. The first challenge is creating the issue and getting, what creates the issue that generates discussion from your city council or your board of supervisors. Well, then how do you get it on the agenda? Once it's on the agenda, how do public officials resolve it? Elected level. And then item 4, how is the policy then implemented? And then later on, you check to make sure it was happening. That's step number 5. So on this issue, I think the topic before us this evening, as I understand it, is kind of step number one. How do issues get visibility at elected boards, and then how do you get the issue on the agenda for the policymakers to consider? And as you'll see, it says in item 1 here, what gives rise to issues? Well, triggering devices are often unanticipated occurrences, natural disasters and pandemics and technological problems and so on and so forth. Share. So I'll give you an example. Wei-Tai is a council member in Lafayette, and here a tragedy occurred. A crossing guard was ushering a kid across a crosswalk, and the accelerator rather than the brake, and she ran over the crossing guard and killed him. This was a fluke. It was an unnatural event. It was an unpredicted event. And then it wound up eating up all of the oxygen on the city council's agenda for months. At least that was my perception. This is the garbage can theory of public administration at work. There's a lot of things that need concentration, but in that instance, this kind of fluke happens. So I had promised my panelists I was going to sort of introduce this idea, the garbage can theory, and this process for the way ideas get addressed once they get to the agenda. But maybe it's time for me to just leave it like that, and I can come back, fill in some of the steps going forward from here.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you for the opportunity to open.
Oh, it's great, Steve. Let's keep the can of the garbage can open right now, and we can revisit that and get Deborah Fudge's take on the challenge of having local policy impact and getting local governing bodies to adopt GHG reducing policies. So we're excited to have you, Deborah Fudge, council member, City of Windsor, climate reality leader herself. Deb is also a longtime leader on the board of directors of the Sonoma Marin Area Rail Transit Agency. So Deb Fudge, welcome.
Thank you. I'm coming off of a long council meeting last night where I was trying to reintroduce the REACH code that we had passed in 2019 and had to rescind. So I'm going to leave that story for the end of the meeting because it would take up all of my time. But I am a climate reality leader from Chicago 2013, where I met Wei-Tai. I worked at PG&E for 25 years, and I've been a council member in Windsor for 26 years. So I'm getting to the end of the line here, and sometimes the end of my patience, because I want things to happen more quickly than they do. And Stephen's trash can analogy was perfect. I was sitting in the back and smiling because I said, "Yeah, that's how it is." And so my job as a council member, sometimes in the environmental majority, sometimes not. Right now, I think we have 2.5 out of 5 person majority that cares about climate enough to really stand up, is to try to bring these things forward with help from the citizens. Sometimes citizens do that themselves and help me, and really get more work done on the council with through different allies, and try to make it easy on staff. Some things take a long time to get done at the city level because staff has a lot of work to do. You saw the garbage can, they're working on that. And so there are ways to help them and to bring them templates of other climate action plans and working with other communities to bring what they've done. And that's what we do in Sonoma County. I'm 60 miles north of the Golden Gate Bridge in the northern part of the county, and our leader really is Petaluma, the city of Petaluma. They actually have a citizen and with some council members on it, a climate action committee at the council level. And they've been really proactive and have done a lot of work. And so I've taken a lot of work and some of my counterparts up here and sort of tagged off of what they've done to bring templates to Windsor to make it easier to implement. Sometimes by the time we start doing work in Windsor on an issue, we've learned something from what they've done, and we can tighten it up and make it more succinct and actually more effective. So we all do that together. Windsor's group is not an official climate group associated with the council, but it's called We Act. And that group formed as a group of citizens that come to the council regularly or listen on Zoom. And they actually formed Wasteless Windsor, and they've made the goal of our concerts a zero waste event. So not only do they come to the council and keep us to task on climate issues, but they also are active in the community. So they have standing. So I would recommend and I've got too many notes for 4 minutes, so I'll have to jump in later. But if any of you are in organized groups and you can work within the community in other ways, you have standing when you come before the council, and they'll really listen. The other thing is to find out who the allies on your council are. Hopefully you have a majority. If you don't, you need to, work on that and try to find a common cause or something that another council member that isn't really a climate ally might be interested in. You need to hold your council accountable and make sure if they have climate action plans that they're actually implementing them. Sometimes there are plans that just sit on the shelves. I have ideas about how to do that. And mostly it's networking and meeting with other groups like we do through this Climate Bay Area Reality chapter. Wei-Tai, before he was even elected, we were talking about city issues. And so you can really get a lot with working together throughout this region to really sort of make an impact. The other thing is for citizens to really, in an organized group, hopefully, but also individually, to really watch the agendas. And don't just look for agendas that have a climate issue. Look at everything the council's discussing and look for the climate impact, because sometimes council members don't realize the climate impact of a decision they're making. And you can get up at the meeting or talk on Zoom and say, the greenhouse gas impact of the policy you're about to enact is really a negative for the climate. And this is what you could do to change it. Or these are things we want you to do. We want all electric reach codes. We'd like composting at all of the events. We want housing near transit. If the Public Works Department is looking at purchasing a new truck, electric trucks are coming online in the spring through Chevy. So there's all kinds of things that you can watch your council. And if they don't think of it or their staff doesn't bring it up, you can as citizens in all of the meetings. So I think I have a feeling I used a lot of time. I have a lot more stories to tell, but I'll try to pop in as the questions come up. And I do want to tell my reach code story, so don't let me forget that.
All right, Deb, that's great. Thank you for that. And we'll come back to that story. And so, but let's first hear from Timothy Rood. Tim is Community Development Director in the city of Hercules, a former Piedmont Council member and a climate reality leader himself. He also worked for the city of San Jose, overseeing the development of an award-winning urban design standards and guidelines for the city down there. And welcome, Tim.
Thank you so much, Matt, and thanks for hosting, and thanks for Wei-Tai for the invitation, and thank you all for being here tonight. I think what I bring to this discussion is the perspective of having been on every possible side of the podium. I spent 20 years as an urban planning consultant and architect, and spent a lot of time in front of planning commissions and councils, but always as sort of the expert in the room. And in my own community, I got involved really at an activist level. I and other bike commuters wondered why we couldn't have any bike lanes in our city. There were places where they seemed to make sense. So on that side, I partnered with a local environmental group, Piedmont Connect, that was sort of bringing people together who were interested in climate and environmental issues, including, sustainable gardening and all kinds of other things. And proposed that there be an advocacy group organized around, pedestrian and bicycle advocacy. So I think one of the things, some of the lessons from that were that we didn't just come to council and ask for things. We helped find solutions in the form of grant funding. Now that's a high bar, but doing a climate action plan is expensive. There are programs that can help with city staffing, like the Civic Spark Fellowship Program is an excellent one that Piedmont used and has used for many years, that provided a recent graduate with a one-year placement with a local agency at a very low cost to the agency. And that sometimes can provide the added staff capacity that taking on, additional efforts might otherwise preclude. So in Piedmont, we were able to actually get some real wins on the ground, including a road diet on our busiest street and bike lanes that will probably be my lasting legacy on the ground there. But we also had some lively policy debates around climate and sustainability issues, one of which shortly after I came on the council in 2012, there was a big push for climate divestment and specifically for CalPERS to divest itself of fossil fuel holdings. And so we had local activists pressuring our council or, advocating for our council to send a letter to CalPERS, the state employee pension agency, urging it to divest from fossil fuels. And we had a council that had one confirmed skeptic, two, I would say, kind of moderate, it may be real, but it isn't a problem, or it isn't our problem, or there's nothing we can do about it. And then, two folks who really kind of understood the urgency. But that particular debate, and I had my slides already, I had, clips ripped from the headlines, videos of, tsunamis in Indonesia that had happened the week before, that I didn't end up actually showing at the meeting because the mayor and the city manager both felt that this item didn't call for that type of presentation from a council member, and we ultimately did not send a letter, did not pass the resolution, and the votes just weren't there. And I think the sentiment was on that council was that this isn't really our issue. We're not the governing board of CalPERS. This isn't necessarily a big priority in terms of our, they had an adopted climate action plan. We've got a 100-page plan full of things we're not doing yet. As a planner myself, I guess I like to look to an adopted master plan for implementation actions to bring forward. So if your community has a climate action plan, go through it. Look at all those implementation steps. Look at the ones that are high impact, look at the ones that are low cost. Sometimes there are easy wins, on both ends of those, or, more effective strategies to advocate for. And then, find out who the staff is in your agency, if anyone, who's tasked with working on this. It might be a sustainability coordinator, such as a Civic Spark Fellow. It might be the planning staff who works with the local agencies on long-range planning, transportation, and sustainability issues. I was also on the board of Stop Waste and East Bay Community Energy for the 8 years that I was on council. And one of the other, I think, big part of my environmental legacy in Piedmont was persuading a majority of my fellow council members to support me in making 100% renewable energy the default product for Piedmont residential customers when they were enrolled into East Bay Community Energy. And the way it works is that community choice agencies like ABCE provide a range of choices of power products that may be greener or less green and slightly more expensive or slightly cheaper than PG&E. So there was a very slight premium for the 100% renewable product. And oh, wow, look at us in our little, that's cool. We're on our virtual dais here. Set up a little straighter. I forgot completely what I was talking about. Oh, God. Sorry. EBCE. So 100% renewable. So yeah. So the issue there was basically, are we going to pick, the cheapest one? No. Are we going to pick the one that's, because it's less green than PG&E? We wanted to advance our climate goals. So the debate was between the one that costs exactly the same as PG&E, but still has, a little bit of fossil fuel in it, or the one that's clean and green, 100% renewable. I think what was effective was really just putting the facts on it, that the average Piedmont residential customer would pay $6 a month more under this plan. And it will help the community meet its climate action goals years ahead of schedule. Because actions like that, even REACH codes often only affect new construction. 98% of your community's built environment is existing. So any policy that changes the energy consumption of existing users and buildings, which is give or take in many suburban communities, it's about half cars and half homes, home heating and electrical use, and then driving around are kind of where the bulk of our fossil fuels come from. So the more things you can electrify, obviously, the better, as long as your electricity is renewable. So that was probably well over my 4 minutes too, but look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Oh, it's great, Tim. And you guys are all three, fantastic speakers and experts in the field. And to kick it off, let me turn back to the trash can, Steve, and with all of your thinking caps on, and putting yourself, looking at all of your experience, new volunteers that want to have a little bit of agency in, affecting local policy change. How would they come to find out what are the highest priority issues that are would be smart to work to affect in that trash can, Steve?
Well, I think one of the challenges for cities is I think many cities haven't figured that out themselves, what the highest priority issues are. And in fact, if there's a tactical mistake that I've kind of seen over the years, time and time again, is that you'll have people working on issues that might seem like they're virtuous, but might have low impact. Whereas what the project that Timothy just described, moving people by default into a sustainable energy choice, has a huge impact. So I'm really glad you brought this up, Matt, because I think this is an important thing for this group to talk about tonight, which is, how do you sort of rank order the impact of the various things or steps or tactics that your city can embrace and activate. So that's kind of one. And then two, how do you actually get the city council and the city staff to then go and do it? And I see Timothy is unmuted, so he must have something to contribute.
Well, just again, back to the first place to look, I think, is the climate action plan if you have one, right? I mean, then failing that, the general plan, safety element, more recent ones often kind of broadly address sea level rise and wildfires and other climate-driven concerns. So I think, just getting really familiar with your city's website and long-range planning documents. If they don't have a climate action plan, advocate for one, because that's what's going to provide that framework to set priorities within. Otherwise, it's not just a trash can, it's like a cascading fountain of trash cans where, some people are able to throw them all the way up to the top, but then they still kind of like make their way down to, different buckets of staff that have to deal with them.
Yeah, and Deb, you referred to this too about looking at what other jurisdictions are doing, as a guide, so we're not reinventing the wheel. I just dropped into the chat, one source that's being collected around the country of model policies, but other policies that local jurisdictions, also states and federal jurisdictions, but local jurisdictions can draw from, because we don't need to reinvent the wheel.
You want to speak to exactly.
That, yeah.
You've teed me up exactly what I wanted to say, is that behind me, that's in Windsor, that's on our one of our wastewater ponds, 5,000 floating solar panels that we installed, that's providing 90% of the energy for our wastewater treatment plant. But in Sonoma County, we tend to compete with each other. So we share resources, but we also compete. So after Windsor installed these panels, 5,000, then Healdsburg had to go a few better, right? They had to be better than us. So they have more floating panels than we do. Up here, we started Sonoma Clean Power, which is like the East Bay agency you were talking about. And Windsor was the first city to sign up for Sonoma Clean Power. So we bragged about that. Well, now Windsor's the last city and still hasn't signed up for Evergreen, which is the 100% green option for our city accounts. So when we had a strong council We did the solar panels, we signed up for Sonoma Clean Power, and now I can't get the council to sign up for Evergreen. So that's where I need citizen help, because it's a budget issue. It might cost a little more. So it's really working together and using documents that other cities have put together and bringing it to your own staff in your cities to make it much easier. Then the staff resistance really starts to drop if they see a lot of the work that's been done that they can tag off of.
So you raised a good question, Deb, about who would some volunteers approach, member of the council of the governing body, right? That's an obvious one. But then there's also staff and you guys have, very familiar in one way or another with that angle. Can you guys speak to the differences and the importance of citizens that just have the courage enough to actually bring these things up with either council members or staff?
I think both are important, and the staff can help you identify the council members who might be squishy on these kinds of issues or might be persuadable. So unless you have an established relationship where you have a council member's ear and they're sympathetic and they'll help direct you to the right staff, I would start by inquiring with whoever you think the right staff person might be and help kind of find out what the city is thinking about. It may not have appeared on an agenda yet, but it may be part of their long-range plan. And that way, when you talk to the council member, you're not just hearing about whatever cup they're hearing about, that's their latest idea, which might be a green thing, maybe even a shiny green thing, but may not be the best use of the available resources in terms of making an impact.
Hey, Fred, there's a follow-up question here Tim, there's a follow-up question from Fred that gets a little bit more into that. Can you speak to how, it's the obligation of staff to respond to the citizens, that it's their job? And because I don't think a lot of citizens kind of understand that piece of it. Can you speak to that?
Sure, yeah. So every day, cities get inquiries from citizens about all sorts of things, that generally have something to do with the way the city is operated. And that includes long-range planning issues like climate action. So any department is going to have a duty, essentially, to respond to calls and emails from the public as best it can, given its available resources, to at least answer your questions. We, as staff, and now I'm kind of putting my staff hat back on, we have council members coming at us all day with things that they'd like us to drop everything and do. Generally, the city manager is hearing from the public and council members about things, that latest cup that they'd like us all to focus on. And then we generally have our own ideas of things that we know the city needs to do, maybe in the mid to longer term time frame, due to regional mandates, state mandates, commitments made in prior policy documents. For example, my city doesn't have a climate action plan, City of Hercules, but it does have a recent safety element that calls for the creation of a climate action plan. So but 6 months ago, when I joined the city, I was getting a lot of one-off ideas from council members about, well, can we streamline this and can we solar that? And, they all took some work to kind of vet and chase down. And, I was thinking the whole time, gosh, it seems like maybe the place to start would be to, update our greenhouse gas inventory and do a climate action plan so that we can have a framework for all of these. My community is not a member of a community choice entity. They decided not to do that back when MCE was signing up most of Contra Costa, so that doing so now would give them the opportunity to participate in additional programs for things like EV charging incentives that are done through the County Transportation Authority. So, there's a lot to all of this, and there are a lot of agencies, and there's a lot of, bureaucracy and a lot of acronyms. I think if you have a passion or interest around environmental issues in general, I guess this is one of the biggest things I learned from the climate reality training is tell your own story, speak from your heart. The people who were most effective in advocating for the pet bike plan in Piedmont included a young mother who rode her kids, all the way down the hill and back up to school every day on the back of her cargo bike. because she was able to speak to the difference that infrastructure would make in her life. And, people can disagree. You can argue facts with people all day and they will just say, no, your facts are wrong. But if you're telling your own story and why this is important to you, you own that and no one can take that away from you.
Steve, can you speak to that, issue creation and whether or not staff or the elected members are the best route in your experience? Yeah.
I've given a lot of thought to this question about staff and council and how they react and behave differently. And, there's an old public policy cliche that says where you stand depends upon where you sit. Where you stand on an issue depends upon which chair you sit in, oftentimes. And just generally speaking, now you run the risk of when you make a generalization of being inaccurate, but generally speaking, elected officials and staff members are completely different animals, or as I like to think of them, oftentimes they're completely different models of cars. Elected officials are oftentimes, now Deborah is an outlier because she's been around for 24 years, but oftentimes elected officials are in their first term or their second term. They're like, oftentimes they're like a hot red Ferrari. They arrive, they're flashy,
Tesla.
They are fast, they are powerful. They gather a lot of attention when they're parked on the street. But oftentimes they drive away and they don't stick around. They'll come in with a lot of ideas and they're fast and furious and maybe sometimes they're dealing with the cup that has just fallen out of the garbage can because that's what their incentive is to do, is to try to get reelected. And so they want to deal with the stuff that's coming out of the top of the can because it's the most visible stuff. It's the stuff that they can claim credit for. Staff members are not like Ferraris. They're like Camrys. They're like often 10-year-old, Toyota Camrys that are just chugging away down in the bowels of the organization. But oftentimes they're really well-made. They are subject experts. They care deeply about the issues, and they're totally reliable. Oftentimes they know a lot more about whatever the subject. In fact, I would say more often than not, they know more about the subject at hand than the elected officials. But they have a different set of incentives. They're not running for reelection. What they're trying to do is keep their job and support their family and make sure their kids are going to the schools they want their kids to go schools to go to, and so on and so forth. My experience, having worked for 6 California cities over 35 years, is that, and Nick will nod his head here, that staff will find a way to work on the stuff that staff wants to work on, whether the council, it's the council priority or not. So the most important thing you can do for your city, and I believe this as when I was the city manager, is to hire great staff and to demand that your council hires a great city manager who hires great staff, because council members come and go. Staff members can often be there for a long time. I was the city manager of Lafayette. I worked for Lafayette for 28 years. And, I worked for all kinds of different council members that came and went. I think it's really important to get to know your staff, to encourage your council to support staff, to make sure they're paying wages and salaries and benefits that will attract the very best staff, and then and giving the support staff the support they need.
No doubt, Steve, but staff, and we have several comments coming in along the same theme. Not every jurisdiction has great staff, and sometimes there's a perfectly reasonable citizen petition, that's coming in, and staff is not interested in that. And how do you deal with that? Deb, you talked about needing citizen help in one context. So let me turn that question to you to see, what's your experience on how how a petition or how progress on a particular issue can be made with staff that's not initially supportive.
So I had to laugh at what Stephen said, and I agreed with everything he said, but I guess I'm a Volkswagen bug because I've been around for so long. It's really interesting for me to hear staff perspective on this panel because I think I'm training, and I'm going to say this, I think I'm training my 8th city manager. We've had a lot of turnover lately, and I've had super supportive managers. The key in Windsor, what's different in Windsor is council members are not allowed to go to staff and give them ideas and ask for things. We have to go through the city manager. We're really formal because we've had problems with that in the past, with staff being torn apart and being told to do one thing by one council member, one by another. So we have to go through our town manager. So you really need a strong town manager who will listen to the majority. So the most important thing is to elect people. Let's just start there. Elect people that care about climate from the start and make sure you have at least 3, because if you have 3 and the 3 council members are getting help from the audience, but they're also speaking to their city manager, a city manager needs to follow the council majority or he or she won't be around. So I've got a new city manager now that was a park and rec director. So now he's learning about climate and, electric reach codes. And so he's learning quickly, but he's a good person and he will listen. But we've got a squirrely council right now. So the way they wrote a recent staff report was a little weak. The previous council 2 years ago had given direction on bringing the reach code back, the reenactment. The staff report that came out said, here's your building codes for 2022. Oh, and on the side, maybe you could talk about bringing the reach code back. So I talked to him and I said, but the previous council had given you the direction to do that. So I think you're being squirrely because you have new people on the council, but you had council direction. And so that's where a seasoned council member can maybe speak to a city manager and help give them the strength to go forward. But it's really going back to elections and really electing the right people that care about climate. That's more important now than almost anything else.
Deb, at the outset, I don't know if I answered
your question, but I said
what I wanted to say. I wanted to make sure there was a story you wanted to share at the outset of the call. I wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to do that. Is this a good one?
Yeah, and it's the REACH code. So we enacted a REACH code in 2019. We had a lot of all electric REACH code. We had a lot of, and I had help from people in Marin, and these people are listening to the call today. There's actually a squad that's working on that. And we were sued by a local developer who's Sue Happy, pretty famous up here for doing that, because he said that our CEQA document wasn't good enough. So we ended up having to rescind it because our attorney said it would cost $400,000 to defend it if it went to appeal. And Windsor doesn't have $400,000 to defend to defend that kind of lawsuit. But Santa Rosa, right behind us, passed a REACH code almost identical. He sued them too. They won. So if Windsor hadn't backed down, I think we needed more information on what legal costs really would be. And then we needed the strength not to back down because we would have had an electric REACH code these whole 3 years if we hadn't done that. So that's where you need strong council members who will be able to stand up and try to hold to something that's really important to the community. But anyway, we're bringing it back in for a vote in, I think, January, February, but now we don't have the strong council that we had when we first enacted it. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, so that's one of the frustrating things that can happen. You think you're moving along and then you get sued or something pulls you back.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. So, Tim, did you want to speak to the there's all these, there's comments coming in about, my city's different, my city's this way, my city's that way, and they are all different. And it is complex and it can be intimidating. What do you say to people to say, hang in there, your volunteer voice is going to matter?
Yeah, well, I would say that, oh gosh, your city has a job to do that relates to all of this. Whether or not its governing body believes that climate change is real, it is building bridges and fixing roads and approving development and affecting floodplains and making all kinds of decisions that, as Matt said earlier, I think have potential climate impacts. And so just keeping an eye on your local government is one of the best things you can do as a citizen. And it's one of the levels of government where you can really have the most impact, I think. Every city is different. The politics and how who gets to be the mayor and all of that, it's all a bit different. But if you have an advocate on your council, start with them. They want your help, and they're going to help connect you with organizations and people that can help amplify your voice. And, if you find you're hitting a wall with staff, don't keep banging it, and don't take your, don't go tell your council member to badger the staff to get back to you about the thing that they told you they didn't think they could take on. I mean, that's my view as a staff member, just to put it out there that, we don't appreciate having an individual council member come to, that puts us in a weird situation where, the council is supposed to work as a body through the city manager to direct staff. But as a practical matter, it often, whatever a council member wants kind of becomes what we drop everything in and try to find a way to make happen. So, yeah, I think, if nobody else, your city manager should be aware that you care about this issue. Right. That's the first step. If there's no staff who works on any of the stuff, if it's all consultants, if all they do is development services, the city still has a responsibility to do a housing element every 8 years and get it certified by the state. It's got to keep its general plan up to date, or it'll run afoul of the state in various ways. The regional planning agency imposes a quota, essentially, of housing and affordable housing that every community has to build. Where's that going? What's your community's plan for that? What are the climate effects of that? So even if there isn't something called a climate action plan, I think shining a light, if your community has a good blog or online newspaper that covers local government, that's a huge help. Just because, it's exhausting to watch every meeting. It's exhausting to be in them, but watching them online to try to, find out what's going on is even more exhausting. So I think there's power in numbers. There's power in advocacy organizations in your area, including Climate Reality and others that are maybe more focused on specific topics or more specific areas, are just going to help you find the places where there's the most consensus and the most opportunity to make effective change.
Steve, both Tim and Deb mentioned climate action plans. In your trash can of topics that are in there, do you think that that's a good tactic? Is to focus on what might have already been adopted as a climate action plan, or demand that the jurisdiction have one?
So I think it is now we believe that climate action plan is a requirement for most cities, and if a city doesn't have one, they should. I think that's just pretty much understood in the business. I do want to go to say one thing that was related to both something Timothy said and Deborah said. Deborah, when she talked about the need to elect officials, city council members who care about this stuff, and she's absolutely right. For those of you who don't know, and I presume you do, but this is a city management, city government 101. The organization of a city is like an hourglass, where the city council sits in the top half of the hourglass and the city staff sits in the bottom half of the hourglass. And the city manager is right in the throat of the hourglass. That's where the city manager lives. And I always talk about how a city manager wears like a little beanie with antenna, and they are just listening to the signals from the upper half of the hourglass. And they listen to their council, and they want to hear what the council's priorities are. And they digest those signals, and then they translate that political talk into administrative direction for their staff below them. And it goes out in the form of direction that goes to the various department heads. But the manager is at the throat of the hourglass. And going back to my earlier cliche, where you stand depends upon where you sit. The manager is a high-risk job because that person needs to keep the council members satisfied, or else they lose their job. And apparently in Windsor, this happens a lot. 8 city managers in 24 years. Is that right, Deborah?
Yeah, that's pretty close.
Right.
We've had temporaries and
so if you're a
drama.
manager, and you want to keep your job, you're going to do what the council members ask you to do. And if the majority of them want to have an effective, a robust climate action plan, the city manager will ensure that the department heads are working on that. If, on the other hand, the council members don't seem to care at all about it, it's not going to be the manager's first priority.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the comments that came in about the hourglass, part, what if that hourglass person, the city manager, is, not responsive? What would you recommend as a tactic for a group of citizens to break through that?
Well, as a longtime city manager, I always preferred it when the people who were concerned about my performance would talk to me about it first before going straight to the council members. So if you have concerns that your city manager in your city is not sufficiently climate aware, my first recommendation is you try to make an appointment to see that person and go meet with them and tell them why this is important work. And if they blow you off and seem to be misaligned with your community, well, then you can go talk to your elected officials. But I always liked it when citizens called me and we'd go out for coffee or whatever, because sometimes the manager is dealing with the stuff that's coming out of the garbage can, and that might be, deteriorating playground equipment or potholes over in Happy Valley, and they're not thinking about the climate action plan. It's just not the thing that's coming out of their garbage can at that time. And if you can raise their awareness through a meeting over coffee, that can benefit everybody.
Hey, Wei-Tai, as we continue this conversation, can you drop into the chat, how volunteers can get connected to policy action squads?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you, sir. Let's see. We've got a lot of good comments coming in here. Thanks for all of the good comments coming in here. One of the questions we had talked about, the three of us through email, and you were kind of getting at this, Steve, tactics to avoid, right? Deb, any tactics, for groups of citizens who want to, petition their governing body to adopt more aggressive GHG reducing policies? What should they avoid doing?
Well, they should be polite, because if you come in rude, I'll be looking at my notes or drawing a flower or something else. Be polite and be succinct. Be organized and succinct. You have 3 minutes. Say your most important comments first. If you have other people, it's good to say, I've got this group with me. They can raise their hands in the audience. They agree. I'm representing all of these people. And then you're not doing 3 minutes, and taking up an hour on something that isn't even maybe on the agenda. It's on public comment, period. So be polite, be succinct, be organized. And if you have solutions and ideas that you'd like implemented instead of general speak, bring those. Something I wanted to bring up that we used to have on our agendas, and it dropped off, and I didn't even realize it dropped off until yesterday, was we used to have a line item on our agendas that had the impacts of this policy decision on greenhouse gases. And maybe we didn't count the exact greenhouse gases, but we at least evaluated whether it was helping or hurting the cause. We used to have that. It dropped off 2 city managers ago. The new city manager said, hey, why don't we do that? Let's have a sustainability line item. That's something that citizens can ask for. That's something specific. Come to the meeting. We'd like you, when you have policy decisions on buying vehicles or doing this, to have a line item under where you have a fiscal evaluation, and whether an environmental evaluation, you have a sustainability evaluation. So that will key people into, how this decision could possibly help or hurt your climate efforts.
Yeah, that reminds me of one of Tim's comments about, finding a grant or finding some kind of solution, to help encourage. Tim, what would you say in terms of, what to avoid for citizens?
Cut and paste emails with 200 people sending a cut and paste to the same email. Those, I think, really, at least in the community I was representing, were not effective in changing opinions. I think groups of people who actually got together and worked on something themselves and brought it to council were often extremely effective. The Piedmont Connect group worked with some high school students, it might have been an Eagle Scout project, to do an analysis of water use on city properties in Piedmont, combing through the East Bay mud bills. The staff would never have had the capacity to do that. And so, kind of just presenting opportunities, right? We did some work. Hopefully they coordinated with staff so that they weren't doing it wrong or doing something that was, counterproductive. But, I think if you're able to show that there's power in numbers. And if you're able to tell your own story, particularly as a group, and just avoid the cut and paste, I think it's much more effective.
I just thought of something. Can I throw it in? This is how I was asked to run 26 years ago. I was shy. I was a planning commissioner. I wasn't going to run for council. A group came together that was organized and said, if you run, we will help you. So they chose me out of the planning commission. They promised to organize my campaign. They did it. I learned everything from them about how to run campaigns. And now I'm trying to recruit people like that. So I saw comments in the chat about how do we get good people elected, find them, get one of yourselves to run, and then get a group together who will help them run a campaign, and then do it. If you abandon them, that won't help. But if you really get behind them and help them run a campaign or give them the resources and stay with them, you'll get good people.
Yeah. So as we get closer to the end of this, how about we just go, to each one, about inspiration, right? There's a lot of barriers. There's a lot of challenges, different circumstances. There's some comments, in some jurisdictions, it is true, that there's a super majority blocking, progress on greenhouse gas emissions. But Tim, you made a comment about how, there could be a variety of issues. Maybe find something where there can be a small win and kind of start building those muscles of advocacy that way. Yeah. Can you guys, speak to, the importance of citizen advocacy and why they should be hopeful about finding those places to make a difference? How about, start with you, Steve. Yeah.
Go first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. One of the amazing things about city government is that this is the great experiment in democracy. I mean, this is the great experiment in self-rule. We been walking on the earth as Homo sapiens for 5 or 10,000 years, but it's only the last really couple hundred that this idea that we can govern ourselves has taken hold as a management principle. And we're trying to do this. And I will tell you that in all the cities that I've worked for, it is the citizens that are the locomotive that is dragging this train forward. And whether it's council members that are elected or staff members that are citizens of the world and their communities, and they bring that knowledge and those concerns, or people like you all who are advocates for the thing that you care most about. And you put all these people in a proverbial room and how the policy gets made. Yes, the one thing I would say is, since it sounds like, are we kind of winding down now, Matt? One thing I would like to say is that I think we're in a unique position right now, having had this Inflation Reduction Act passed. There's funding at the state level as well to do amazing work together. And I think it while it presents huge opportunities, it also presents a challenge for how local governments and state governments and the federal government are all going to work together in kind of what they call a whole of government approach. Because this is really where the opportunities are going to be now, is where this money is coming out of the federal government to do really important things like giant tax credits for solar panels and subsidies for electric vehicles and $14,000 or $15,000 a year to every homeowner to do upgrades on to heat pumps and better insulated windows and so on and so forth. $1 billion for clean air school buses. I mean, our communities need to become very effective at working within this new incentive structure to work on those projects. And if I were a citizen advocate at this point, that's probably the message I would be driving home to my elected officials is this is no longer we're going it alone. We need to partner with our state and federal government here because that's where the big opportunities are.
Great. Let me turn to you, Deb.
I was just thinking about when we first started talking about climate in Windsor in 2001, and we had to keep explaining what we meant by it. And now, as of a few years ago, we don't need to explain it. Everybody understands, especially those of us in fire zones, right? We've lived through it. And so now nobody really questions it here. They just think it's too expensive. It's not the right time. We have more time. I'm kind of changing a little. Something I wanted to say that I just thought of is up here, social media is highly effective in a negative way. And we've been trying to figure out how to combat that, especially in our last election up here. It didn't go well. And it was because of organized people who were sort of using social media to trash other candidates or favor their own. And so I think if a lot of us, many more citizens who care about climate would use social media in a positive way. Next door, your family Facebook pages in your cities, and really, get the message out and say, I'd like to form a group. I'd like to, do this in my city. And you'll start gathering people in a positive way. And maybe we can turn this social media negativity around and use it in a positive way for climate. We haven't figured out how to do that here in Windsor, but I'm trying to, work that out. But it's been a really effective way of communicating up here in a negative way. And let's make it positive and we can all move forward more closely together and more quickly, I think.
And Tim, how about you? How would you reflect on the importance, from a volunteer's perspective of getting into this game and the efficacy, that they can have? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, and speaking personally as someone who is not, a member of a religion, I find meaning in life in leading this planet in the best possible shape that I can. To me, that's what we're here to do, is to try to, get our house in order for the coming generation so that, my children and if I ever have grandchildren and yours and everyone's, we'll have a habitable planet to live on and not experience massive disruption. So, I think there's so much opportunity at the local level because everything wears out. Infrastructure wears out, development wears out, strip malls wear out. New mandates are constantly being imposed. Our legislature in California is up all night thinking of new requirements for local jurisdictions to do things, to streamline development near transit, to stop requiring parking near transit. There are a slew of new state laws coming down that are going to make a lot of the NIMBY opposition to urban infill development much harder to get away with, whether cities want to or not. So, staff is in this position of never having enough time or resources to do everything, having a constant stream of new demands for things, both, from their own community and from external agencies. So, be patient with them, work as a group within your own community. Even if staff doesn't want to engage, then get your own lecture series together and, get someone in to talk about heat pumps, even just in someone's living room. The Piedmont Connect Group was really influential in bringing together, kind of niche enthusiasts for solar power and electric vehicles and, sustainable gardens and bike lanes, who didn't think of themselves as being part of the same community. But by sharing information and by getting involved on the online media discussion to respectfully point to, resources that people could use to inform themselves. Those are just all ways that I think that the power of collective activism can really make a difference on what to me is clearly the biggest issue of our era.
Yeah, and Linda Deschambault just put an excellent message in chat just about, it does take a while, but cities are where it's at. A lot of great change happens there. Wei-Tai, you dropped a link. Can you tell people, volunteers on here that might not yet be active in the Climate Reality Project, what might be expected if they click that and start to get more engaged?
Sure. I mean, first of all, fantastic panel discussion. This is really so substantive and definitely. And when we call this an expert panel, wouldn't we all agree and give these guys a huge round of applause? That is some really in-depth learnings from really decades of civil service and experience. So I learned so much tonight. But I think to keep this conversation going about how do climate activists become effective in working at the local level, learning the things we did from you today, we in the Bay Area chapter, we work at the county level. So like Marin County, San Francisco County, Contra Costa County, Alameda. And so we do break out into county level squads, smaller groups, policy action squads. And within each of those county squads, they get together and work on either local policy action. And we also have state and federal groups too. So the link I put in there allows you to tell us about yourself, tell us about your interests, and so that we can loop back and contact you afterwards. Matt, and I know before I just wanted to also invite some of you, Matt's been doing an incredible job reading all the questions out loud here. I also just wanted to give anyone a last minute opportunity to just raise your hand and show your face, chime in and ask a question. I do want to call on Rob Cullen from the city of Danville, because I know he has done an incredible amount of work as a single individual to try to create change in a tough city for climate. And I know he has a burning question here. So, Rob, if you can unmute yourself and let me ask Kevin to just take off the pins here, and we'll just all be in the same room so that we can also see Rob.
Thanks, Wei-Tai. I appreciate that. And I will see if I can share my video. So my question to Wei-Tai was, it's great information. I appreciate everybody's comments and a lot of really good insights in terms of how to work with the council and the staff. And my question is, how do you value that versus building community support and building a group of citizens who will come and take action and all those sorts of actions? I've been focused very much on the individuals and with the town council and individuals and get a lot of nice nods. But I feel like I need to actually spend a lot more time on actually building community support. And so I'm interested in how you think about that.
Who wants to take that on?
I guess I can talk about that slide that I showed near the beginning, where it talked about these 5 steps to getting stuff done. One is just the issue needs to be raised. It needs to become visible. Number 2, you need to somehow get the visible issue now on the agenda for the city council to consider it. I'm hearing you say, like, how do you do that? Is that right?
No, done that, and the politicians have done a very nice job of saying, "Yep, great, we considered it. We're done. Don't need to consider it again for the next 10 years."
So, what's your frustration? Is that it was on the agenda and the council didn't do anything with it, or
no, didn't discuss it, didn't spend any time on it, and they were wait on the state, and so it's a matter of raising it to a higher level that they actually spend time and focus on it.
So maybe Steve, like when you gave us that third slide with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, wasn't the first question like how do you make it an issue, right?
Yeah.
And Rob, is it like he is a one-man band there because again,
Yeah.
Danville having the challenge of rounding up some other supporters. So I do think it's quite relevant to what the group has talked about. Like go find some other members of your tribe so that you're not doing it solo, right? We've heard that tonight. But also, go ahead.
Can I say, I think we've heard some suggestions from Timothy and Deborah tonight about how to activate an issue to the point where the city starts to do things with it. For instance, I have a perception that many people think if they just do a petition, we'll do a petition on change.org, and we'll get 132 signatures on it, that they will just drop that off, and then the city council will immediately embrace it and make it their pet issue. That almost never happens. It's not an effective way. I think you look at some of the lessons that Timothy has talked about tonight with his bike lane advocacy. You get a few people who are committed to this. They meet over and over again with the council members. They provide options. I think this is, I cannot emphasize how important this is. Provide options and recommendations for the council that makes it easy for them to embrace what you're asking them to do. And then you let them know that you're not going away. One of the great lessons I learned was from a council member that I worked with named Ann Groden, who felt like our community needed a new library. This is a massive project. It's a $40 million project. And she was just determined that she was going to work on this until she got it done. And she was doggedly determined, and she presented options and funding scenarios and just kept at it until she brought everybody along. And now we have this new library. So I think that you have to perceive that you're in this for the long haul. Good relationships with your elected officials and your staff members. Provide them with options and recommendations. And then just be persistent. That's kind of my overarching advice here. I'd like to hear from Deborah and Timothy on that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And if you work with other cities, contact friends in other cities. And if I don't know what your issue was, but if there's an example that's been done in another city, you bring that actual plan or drawings or whatever it is to your city and say, like this. Only we can tailor it toward ourselves. But here's when you're bringing something concrete. And I was just thinking of bike lanes. And when I started, the first time we tried to get a bike lane in Windsor, I harassed the public works director so much that he finally went out and painted some green himself before we even had the right color of green. And now we're doing bike boxes and sharrows. And they went out and learned that on their own because they kind of got interesting to them. But it really does take more than one person. And so that's why I talked about social media and gathering some new friends on social media. Anybody else interested in X? Would you meet with me? Could we all get information from other cities about what they've done and take this to our city, and then form a group? A group is really powerful, and those,
Yeah, and I would just amplify what Stephen and Deborah said. the stories that you can tell from your own experience. If there's anything I leave you with, it's, how did this affect you? How is climate change affecting you personally? It has affected all of us in ways I don't think most of us dreamed possible would be happening now. And so, that's very powerful. And your policymakers have emotions. They're people like everyone else. They have families. I think you can speak from the heart in a way that's polite and respectful. That to me is what makes activists really the most effective. And then just to geek out for a little bit, the documents, the staff reports associated with all of these plans and discussion items are a great thing to keep tabs on if you have the energy and bandwidth. You can go to any city's website. There will be a section called agendas, usually, or something like that. And you can search by keyword in the Planning Commission and Council agendas, for the past 10 or 15 years, usually. And you can see what has been talked about in the past. I learned that, the city I worked for had discussed joining MCE, 5 years ago. And what were the issues then? So you can get a sense of that perspective, and you can see before the meeting what staff is recommending. So there's a critical window, usually 3 days before the meeting, the agenda materials will be posted. Look at those staff reports be it on Thursday or Friday afternoon when they're posted on the website. Find out, email the staff and ask them, if you have questions. Ask your council member if you think that they're about to adopt something that's, fatally flawed. Write your council member or speak at the meeting if you support what they're being asked to adopt. Right? That's one of the most, and Zoom makes it easier than ever to speak at a council meeting. So, you can have it in your earpiece while you cook dinner, and then, you don't have to be on camera. Usually you can make your public comment essentially over the phone. So it's easier than it ever has been. And I just want to leave you with, the power of telling your story together with others about what you're working on to address this issue and what you would like your city to be a leader in working on.
Fantastic.
That's really good framing. I would like our city to be a leader and phrase that really positively like that, because people want to be leaders. They want to provide the best example, and it does start some competition, which can be really healthy.
Thank you, Deborah. Well, we have come to just about where we are, 7:15, our ending point. So thank you, Stephen, Deb, Timothy, for fantastic, huge thought leadership. And we could just keep going on, and we will continue this conversation down the road. But let's adjourn, and we'll adjourn. And anybody, typically if we were in person, we'd adjourn and then we'd hang around and chit chat for another 10 more minutes. So we sort of still try to do that online. Anybody who needs to leave, we're going to turn off the recording and we'll adjourn. But if anybody would like to hang out for a few minutes to say hi, I'll hang out, and everybody's welcome to just hang out. Otherwise, we wish you a good evening and good night.